Well, today we have a very special guest, someone who has really done a lot on the local level, but also has continued to make waves nationally for his work in politics and philosophy, economics. You may know him as the wrestler Kane. The WWE Hall of Famer Glenn Jacobs is now and has been the mayor of Knox County for since 2018, and he joins me now. How you doing, sir?
Hey, David, thanks for having me on. I'm doing well. You?
Very good. And it's great to have you on. Now, one of the things that I thought was fascinating, and we can get into kind of some of the origins of your political entrance and so forth, but you really held the line when it came to all of that COVID lockdowns and the tyranny, the mask nonsense. And you've been vindicated by history by taking that stance. And that's an example where local politics really does matter, doesn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's kind of interesting is no one has ever apologized for all the terrible things that they said about me when that was going on. Imagine that, right?
Yeah, you took some
Um,
heat. I remember in the middle of it. Yeah.
I did, but it's the right thing to do. And obviously, and I get it, everybody was scared, everybody was frightened. This was something new. At the same time, I took an oath to protect the United States Constitution. And to me, that's put everything else aside. There's a lot of important stuff, but to me, that oath protecting the U.S. Constitution, the Tennessee Constitution, and in my case, the Charter of Knox County, that's my job. And what I saw happening in COVID was that they were under direct assault, and the Bill of Rights was under direct assault. And people had really succumbed to that panic and that fear. And often politicians will say, well, the Constitution, it doesn't count right now. There is no escape clause in the Constitution. And if we say, oh, well, it doesn't apply in these instances, obviously government's going to figure out a way to make it apply in more instances. There's always going to be an emergency. And next thing you know, are no longer America, because those rights and freedoms are what make us such a great country. So I saw it really, again, as a direct assault on our way of life and a direct assault on our rights, freedoms, and liberties.
We talk a little bit about on one of our side shows that we do Things Hidden. We get into anthropology, and I got to tell you, looking at human history, when you have a plague, people lose their minds collectively, and it takes people with principles who are not trying to be fair weather politicians to really stand like a rock when you have those kind of mania moments, because otherwise, you're just going to disintegrate the foundations of civilization. If you say, okay, everybody get a mask mandate, everybody, QR codes. Did that ever come to your area, by the way, the whole vaccine passports to get in?
No, I'm proud of what we did in Tennessee. In some cases, we went further than I would have across the state. But in the end, I also think that, within a relatively short period, most folks had figured out that we were going down a bad path. Now, obviously, again, you're kind of split, but we never went that far as having the vax mandates. Some of the other craziness that we saw other places, it just never came here. And frankly, I don't think our people would have put up with it.
Yeah. So, that was something that was really catching people's attention. But of course, you've had other fights and challenges for the defense of liberty through your term as mayor of Knox County. Tell us a little about kind of some of the things that you face. You would call yourself a libertarian, correct?
Yeah, I would. Conservatarian, maybe,
Yeah.
with a conservative with strong libertarian leanings. In
Yeah.
fact, our country is built on libertarian philosophy,
Right.
which is that that's why we have a Bill of Rights. That's why we have limited government in our Constitution. But I also think that the structures and institutions that are in place are very important as well. So for me, it's just ensuring that those things remain. I mean, that we conserve those, and that's really when we're using the term conservative. That's what I think it means,
Mhm.
is we are conserving the values which made our country great. And chief among those is this thing we call the American dream. That's the ability to create and live your own life so long as you're allowing other people to do the same, so long as you're not violating other people's rights. A couple things I'm really proud of. We are a Second Amendment constitutional county, which means that the Second Amendment is alive and well in Knox County, and we take it very seriously. We've done a lot of work with early childhood literacy, in addition to what schools do, but also on our own here in the mayor's office, as well as more CTE programming for our young people in schools and those recently graduated. In some cases, folks that are older. And one of the things that I'm most proudest of is we have not raised taxes since I've been mayor, across the country. And that's actually kind of hard when you're local government, because we feel the impact of inflation just like everyone else does. We can't print money like the feds do. Okay. And that's actually what causes inflation, by the way, is printing money. But nevertheless, we can't do that like the feds do, but we still see the price of everything that we have to buy: construction material, gasoline, diesel, even salaries and those sort of things. We have to be a competitive employer. So we've seen the price of those things all go up. So if you look at our per resident spend since I've been mayor, and my predecessor is Congressman Tim Burchett, and Tim is also a great fiscal conservative, but you've actually seen, adjusted for inflation, our per resident spending is down compared to where it was, say, 10 years ago, as well as our debt is also down from where it was 10 years ago. Again, that's adjusted for inflation, obviously, but that's in this environment, that's kind of hard to do. But we've been very fortunate. We've seen some economic growth. We're a place that people are coming to because it's such a great place to live. So those have really helped us out. But David, I'll tell you a quick story. One day I walked in my office and there was an older lady in the lobby, and she was just crying, is having a really bad day. There have been some issues with her taxes, not from the county, but some other stuff. And she was having a hard time making ends meet. And to me, we as elected officials, we forget about her. We want to do all these cool things and build all this stuff and, all of that. But then we forget who pays for that. And for folks like her, 10 or 20 bucks a month is a really big deal. So actually, two things that I'm most proud of is I did not bend during COVID, and we have not raised taxes.
So you guys have do you have sales tax? What's your sales tax rate there?
Yeah, and that's really the state does that, but okay. and ours is higher here in Tennessee. Yeah. We are mainly a sales tax driven state, actually.
Right. We do not have income tax there.
We don't have a state income tax. And in fact, the Constitution does not allow a state income tax. There was an amendment passed years ago, so we'll never have that here in Tennessee. Our sales tax is probably a little higher than the national average, but we're one of the lowest property tax states in the country, depending on what metric you use. In fact, we are the lowest state and local tax burden of any state in the nation, with the exception of Alaska. But what Alaska does is they pay royalties from the oil fields. So that's comparing apples to oranges. But again, we're one of the lowest tax jurisdictions in the entire country.
I see. Yes. So you were able to hold the line. You didn't raise any taxes under your tenure so far.
Yep. And don't plan on it.
Yeah.
And again, I do. I feel sympathetic towards a lot of local governments, because what's happening is Washington's printing all this money, causing the price of all these things to go up, and it just flows down to the state and the local people. Yeah. And then we're the ones with so many things. We're the ones that get caught in the crossfire there.
Now you have an 11 member commission, right? And then you have your position, which is kind of an executive, like a chief financial officer. Is that you're crafting the budget yourself, or they create it? Right. And then you?
No, we have a finance department, and my duty, according to the charter, is to prepare and present a budget to county commission. Yeah. I'm a true executive. That's why in Tennessee, it's weird. Like, people ask you, what's a county mayor? Well, in some places you have county executives, or you have a judge, or even a county commissioner. But in Tennessee, we actually have, we call them mayors. They're the same thing, but I'm a true executive. I do not sit on county commission. So we have a legislative and an executive branch here in Knox County.
So do you have the voice of Murray Rothbard over your shoulder as a libertarian philosopher when you're looking at that budget every time?
I try, and we also have to. One of the most difficult things, actually, for folks like me, is we don't live in a libertarian world that we all
Right.
love to live
Yeah.
in, right? So I have to figure out how how I can do things in the most liber- liberty minded way and the most fiscally conservative way, while at the same time understanding, say for instance, the state of Tennessee requires us to do certain things. I have to do those,
Mhm.
or otherwise, otherwise I'm gonna get thrown out of office. So that's really the balance. And you see someone like Rand Paul, and he does a lot of the same things. Like some of my libertarian friends, oh, Rand's not a real libertarian. Well, thank goodness he's in the Senate because he's in so many issues. He's the person to tell the line.
Right.
Especially you think about foreign wars, and I seriously think that especially when Donald Trump was president, Rand's influence really kept us out of some foreign engagements. So that's one of the hardest things is you have this philosophy, and then how do you make it work in a world which is almost completely opposite of what your philosophy
Right.
dictates?
Yeah, that's kind of wanted to get at with you is how do you negotiate these principles that are not negotiable, but yet you do live in a world that is far from where it needs to be, certainly far from the founding fathers intended the role of government. But you're at a
Sure.
local level, which the founding fathers didn't speak as much about what local powers, would be retained by local cities and counties as much. They were more focused on the federal level. So how do you negotiate the difference between where you want things to be, but where reality allows you to get?
Well, one thing to keep in mind is that the founding fathers envisioned a country where most of the power actually resided with the states
Right. Yeah.
and then by extension with the localities. And the
Yeah.
federal government was supposed to be very small. They were essentially supposed to be responsible for national defense, interaction with other countries, and regulated disputes among the states and the citizens of the states. And
Yeah.
that was really about it. Now, of course, they're into everything. And that's part of the problem. And they bribe states and they bribe localities with their own money.
Right.
You do this, or we're not going to give you the money that we've collected from your taxpayers to begin with.
Yeah.
So it's. I was talking with someone the other day, and one of the shortcomings of the Constitution. I think the Constitution is a great document, but obviously, there are looking back, there are some things that we could probably would have changed. And one of those would have been like the feds shouldn't be giving money to the states. I mean,
Right.
they should. They're able to literally bribe us with their own money. But what I try to do is I really do try to think about, okay, at least let's not contribute to bigger government. And let's kind of try to push things in a smaller government direction. That's not always possible, but in many cases, you can do things like public-private partnerships, right? So at least the government's not taking all the risk and paying all the bills itself. Someone else has some skin in the game. I've really tried to activate the philanthropic sector, the faith-based community. They can do things that government can't, and frankly, they're a lot better at some of that stuff than government is. And often politicians just think, well, we'll just spend the money and we'll just do it ourselves.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
that's not effective, and that's really not something you should be doing anyway. So for me, it's looking for where you can. It's trying to find those alternatives and maybe different ways of doing things, and thinking outside the box a little bit, and not just, oh my gosh, we'll just throw a bunch of money at this problem. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a problem, but what can we do besides spending government money? And that's where your bully pulpit also comes into play, and your ability to convene all these different people from throughout the different sectors of your community. How can you engage that as opposed to just thinking, oh, we'll just spend a couple $1 million and say we did something?
Right. Yeah. I was thinking about that there's a lot of power that one has. I mean, you go back to the history of mayor and the concept of county governance, hundreds of years into Western law tradition, even going back to nobility, this idea that the person who was the executive over the county would be one of great moral reputation and great nobility. And that has its own capital, right? That if you use that wisely, you can be a cheerleader for, like you said, rallying churches and things to take on things like drug problems, instead of the government trying to micromanage these things, to be that kind of cheerleader to get the community excited about taking action, right?
Yeah. Early in my first term, we were able to convene a number of churches from around the county. It was me, a state rep named Jason Zachary, as well as the district attorney and the sheriff. And we brought them to the table to discuss the drug epidemic. And they had not realized how serious this problem was, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just because they're not on the ground like we are seeing it. And so they decided to get involved. And the first thing that they did is they were able to fund and create a faith-based recovery clinic. They had that thing up and going within like 6 months.
Wow.
If that had been government doing it,
yeah,
to this day, we would still be talking about it. And they've already, it's been going now for 3 years and has been very successful. And that's just, again, that was just us saying, hey, this is a problem. You guys are much better positioned than we are to help address it. Please help us. And they stepped up in a huge way.
That's great. So have you seen fentanyl? Has that problem become a bigger problem during your tenure, or have you guys been able to kind of keep it at bay, or how does that work for you?
No, it's a problem everywhere. And unfortunately, we're at the epicenter of especially with the opioid epidemic. And what's happened now, of course, is it's transitioned from opioids and really heroin, because if people couldn't get opioids, and then they would start taking heroin. Then meth is making a comeback, but then also fentanyl, which is, fentanyl synthetic heroin is really what it is. And, just with these drug issues, it's almost like playing whack-a-mole. I mean, one thing pops up and it kind of gets tampered down, and then something else pops up and it gets tampered down.
You can understand that from your libertarian background, right? The idea of if as long as there's a demand there,
that's
whack-a-mole supply games just makes somebody else have more of a lucrative profit, right?
Because you took sadly, as long as there's demand, someone will step up to supply it. And unfortunately, what happens with the drug trade, since it's an illicit and illegal trade, it's the really bad people that step up and fill that. So, and that's the other reason that we really wanted to get the churches engaged, is because this, in the end, and I really believe that addiction is an issue with the spirit. Okay. Right. And people have a hole in their life and they're trying to fill it with whatever. And eventually they turn to drugs, and that doesn't fill it either. But then obviously they become addicted, and then they're on a very bad path. So, to your point, and you're exactly right, I think it's supply and demand. Right. We put so much emphasis on trying to dry up the supply, but as long as there's demand, there's always going to be supply. But the government really can't do a whole lot about demand. Right. That is something that I think that the faith-based community and other people in the community are much better placed to do than we are. I mean, we can make drugs illegal, we can do those things, but there's still going to be demand.
Well, they had that famous, I don't know if you ever saw it, this famous rat city study where they took rats, and they put like water that was regular and then cocaine laced water or something. And as long as the rats had a healthy little community of rats, they were all happy. They went for the non-drugged water. But when they were isolated and they felt despair, alienation, whatever a rat feels like that, they became, they went to the drug laced water. I think that this rise in addiction, first of all, it was caused by the federal government and the FDA approving these, oxycodone, and the FDA intentionally put a little notice in there saying not addictive, not addictive. Right. They put that in the actual drug box, and that guy who did that went on to work for Purdue, by the way, Purdue, the pharma company. So it's interesting how that works. So they unleash this scourge. And then they, of course, it's a whack-a-mole, a never-ending lucrative game for them. But if you don't get the economic vitality right, if you don't get the cultural spirit high and spiritual reformation, it's never-ending. It's just a kind of a no-win game, really, right?
Yeah. We talk about the military-industrial complex. Yeah. But at this point, there are so many blank industrial complexes. Yeah. whether it's the media industrial complex and the censorship that we
Yeah.
saw. But you hit on it, and also, frankly, the technology and science industrial
Yeah.
complex. We remember that President Eisenhower talked about the military industrial complex, but he also talked about the scientific elite, and we saw that during COVID. But also the big pharma industrial complex is a huge, huge issue. And to me, and don't get me wrong, there are a lot of good people in these areas, obviously. But with big pharma and what they've done, they have done as much to harm this country as anything, which is very sad, but it's also very true. And so much of that, their willing accomplice has been the federal government, whether it's been the FDA or public health officials or whoever.
I'm curious, do you feel that pressure of that medical industrial complex in your role? Do they come at you with pressure to do stuff, or does it not work like that?
Yeah. Not really. No, it doesn't. At my level, they're not. I mean, the closest that I came to that was all this stuff coming from COVID. But we also have to remember that during COVID, all those decisions were radiating from the feds. They were coming down from the CDC or from the NIH and, from St. Fauci and all these different things. And essentially was really, really kind of disheartening was that many local officials were just parroting what they were hearing coming out of Washington. And anyone who disagreed with that, including very qualified physicians, were demonized and, just ostracized. Again, turns out that many of these people were correct. But nevertheless, if you were not in line with the narrative, you were a very evil person in 2020.
And in fact, it's turned out the opposite, because so many people who force masks, especially you talked about little kids earlier, early literacy, when you're putting that mask on kids and you're not giving them a break from that, that's deleterious to the health for serious.
Well, again, the federal government. So here in Knox County, I was really proud that our school board twice voted down mask mandates. I think it was 21, but the pandemic had kind of peaked and was coming down, and they twice voted them down, and then they were sued in federal court under the ADA, the Americans with Disability Act, and a federal judge imposed an injunction on our schools with a mask mandate, citing the ADA, and it's like, dude, this is a local decision. Okay. And not only are you overstepping your bounds from a federalist perspective, but you've taken the ADA now, which we've always think of as regulating your plant, your facilities, right? You have to have ADA compliant bathrooms and wheelchair ramps and those sort of things. Okay. Understand that. Now you've taken it and you're regulating people's behavior. And that is a completely different dimensions. And he even admitted that in his opinion. He said they're contemplating something that's never been done with the ADA before. And then a few months later, we were actually sued over kids chewing gum in the classroom because this one child had a condition where they were triggered by noises. So, schools have done everything, noise canceling headphones and all that sort of stuff for this young person. But then you turn around and at this school, they have they follow kind of a non-traditional structure in that they have one of their classroom hours people eat in class so that they can study. Well, they potentially can't do that anymore. And again, it's because of the federal government getting involved in our business, and they have no place there.
Another local thing that's been big nationally has been these folks finding bizarre French postmodern gender deconstruction books in kids' libraries. Have you guys had that problem over there?
No, I mean, when we have an issue like that, it's because we have, say, a rogue teacher, or it's just something that shouldn't be there or hasn't been brought to the attention of the school. In our own public libraries, if someone reports something, we'll take a look, and if it needs to be moved to the adult section, we'll do that. And schools are very good as well. But the main issue that we've had is just teachers teaching stuff that has not been approved by whatever that process is, but they're teaching outside of the curriculum, which is they're not supposed to do that.
Yeah, I see. I want to turn to the national scene. You were recently on the campaign trail for former President Trump in Iowa. What was that experience like? How did that go?
It was amazing. It was 30 degrees below zero with the wind chill, so it was really cold, but it was also amazing just to see the caucus in action. So caucus night starts at 7 p.m. and they'll have different precincts there. So I was in West Des Moines in a high school, and they have, I don't know, probably 750 people there from a couple of different voting precincts. The first 15 minutes are speeches that are delivered by supporters of the candidate, but they're not politicians. They're just your neighbor. So from a polished, this is a great public speech, they weren't great, right? Because these people are not great public speakers. That's not what they do. But from a genuine, authentic perspective, they were amazing. Yeah. Because this was just normal people speaking from the heart. And the really cool thing is when they would get done, no one is like, I hate your candidate, you stink. They're like, hey, great job, so-and-so. It was really cool to see. Then they pass out the ballots, people vote, put the ballots in a ballot box. 8 p.m., it stops. They open the ballot boxes up and count the votes in front of everyone. Yeah. 1,600 places around the state that does that. And as I'm sitting there watching this, I'm like, wow, here in Iowa, they have this caucus done in like an hour, and they have everything counted and everything ready to go. And then some states cannot count their votes for months, weeks and months at a time. How does that work? Yeah. But it was just really cool to see that bit of Americana and really a throwback to decades ago, but it still works today. It's just really cool. Yeah.
How does it like campaigning with Trump? How far do you guys go back, you two? I mean, you guys have some history there, right?
I think I met him when he did the WrestleMania at Ford Field in Detroit, and it was the Battle of the Billionaires, and got to shake his hand there, but don't remember that very well. But I've had the opportunity to meet him a couple of times now. I actually went to Bedminster, New Jersey, to one of his golf courses, and I thought it was going to be one of those things where you walk in and shake his hand and get a picture in 2 minutes, and that's it. Yeah. Talked with me for 20 minutes and just sat there and talked with me. And at no point did I feel like he was trying to get rid of me. He was engaged the whole time, very friendly, really gregarious, actually. So that when you get to talk with him personally, you see him on TV and all the mean stuff that people say about him and how he's that fighter. But when you get to talk to him one-on-one, he's just he's just friendly and engaging and very nice, very polite. So that had a huge impact on me as far as like, okay, this is, this guy is what he says he is. He's really just a guy. Yeah. Obviously a little different than us, but just the guy. So that was really cool. And I've gotten to talk with him on the phone a few times and meet him at events, and he's always been that way. Yeah. And when, he is a great politician in that he has great interpersonal relationship skills, actually.
Yeah, he seems to be a big fan of yours. I'd be interesting to see, goes to Tennessee for that primary, what might happen. That'd be cool, huh?
It will be cool.
You guys have a primary or a caucus there? Is it?
We have a primary.
Yeah.
And Trump is, I think in Knox County, his approval rating is about 68%. So he will do fine in the primary here.
Well, on the national scene, he's been big on trying to end these foreign entanglements. And we've seen now the Senate's trying to push this new foreign aid package. I mean, that's more inflation, right? I mean, this huge.
It's more inflation. We have $34 trillion national debt, but let's just print up another 116 billion or whatever it is and send it overseas. None of this makes any sense. We can no longer afford to be the world's policeman. One of the most memorable and terrible things in my term is one of the 13 service members who were killed during the catastrophic withdrawal from Afghanistan was from Knox County. Obviously, I strongly believe that the Afghanistan war should have ended long ago, but the way that that was done was, I mean, it's just incompetence. I mean, just absolute incompetence. And, if Trump had been in there, that never would have happened, because the perpetrators of that event would have known that if they had done that, Trump would have literally just, he would have unleashed everything, right? And he certainly wouldn't have turned over billions of dollars of military hardware to a hostile country or a hostile government like the Taliban. But the fact that we lost someone here, and in my opinion, it was based on incompetence more than anything else. Yeah. We do not need to be starting any more wars anywhere in the world. It's too expensive, and our boys and girls' lives are way too valuable for that foolishness.
Yeah, you mentioned former Mayor Tim Burkett, who's now in the Congress. He's made some national headlines about his push to have transparency about what the government knows about UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, or UFOs, as we used to call them back in the day. He's been pretty passionate about the things that he said he's seen, that there's something there. He said in a famous press conference I saw, he said the war pigs are not going to be happy if they've got technology that would put them out of business for their wars for, resources and energy. What's your thoughts on that whole, thing? I mean, it's kind of a left field thing, but it's become more and more normalized. Marco Rubio, Chuck Schumer, Anna Paulina Luna down here in Florida, a lot of Matt Gaetz, they're all talking about this is a real thing.
What everyone has to remember is that Tim Burchett, who's part of whose job is to oversee the defense budget, is not allowed to see information about UFOs. So how can you be making decisions about how much money to give someone when they say that, oh, this is classified, you can't look at it? And there are so many parts of our budget that aren't like that now, that are in the black budget, that they're classified, you can't see. And the fact that they won't trust the American people to make their own decisions. We get to vote President of the United States, who has a nuclear button that can destroy the entire world. But we can't be treated like grown-ups when it comes to things like this. And Tim himself said, this is not about little green men and flying saucers. This is about government transparency. Right. And if they're not going to be transparent with this, what else are they hiding from us? And I think that's a great point.
And it makes you wonder when he keeps talking about, he's mentioned that energy factor. If whoever made it, if they've got some kind of technology that could enrich, look at the folks like we just mentioned who are turning to drugs and despair. There's no growth, there's no real growth in the national scene. There's no belief that something right under our noses could still be discovered. If they've got something that could alleviate, some of the poverty and open up energy abundance, that's a crime right there, that they're holding that back from the public to be able to have access to,
Well, I mean, they shut down pipelines and everything else. They shut down natural gas production. Yeah. It really does seem that the goal is to keep us poor, starving, and cold. And also empowering our enemies overseas. Yeah. That's part of the reason that we're engaged in all these places around the world. It's oil and natural gas, folks, and accessibility to it. And instead of pursuing our own here, and we are very rich in this area, shut it down. So we have to be involved in these places around the world that we don't even understand. Yeah. And they're just going to hate us being there no matter what. That doesn't make any sense to me at all. Yeah. So to me, the energy policy of the United States should be drill, baby, drill with everything. And then we have a lot more leverage around the world. And if there's something else, we're right now in Tennessee, we're talking a lot about the nuclear renaissance that the country is going through. Well, the thing is, it takes 10 years to permit a new nuclear power plant, right? I mean, and there's technology now that nuclear is clean, it's safe, and these plants could be coming online in the very near future, but because of bureaucratic red tape, that's delaying those. And our world now runs on electricity. And we talk about fossil fuels, that's part of it. But without electricity, you and I aren't talking. None of the things the conveniences that we enjoy, in fact, our way of life ceases to exist. So anything that we can do to improve our energy standing, the better. And I'm sorry, folks, but wind and solar don't cut it.
Yeah. We need to find our Nikola Teslas in our generation that can get out there. You know, Nikola Tesla didn't go to Congress, say, please, Congress, pass this bill for me to allow alternating current. He just made it and it caught on, you know, and it took over the world. And it's still what we're using as the basis of our, you know, basic electricity today. Another guy that you probably have a lot of common interest with, Tucker Carlson recently did the interview with Vladimir Putin. Did you see that? And any thoughts on that?
I did not see that.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing to me that I think Chris Wallace, who is now with CNN,
Yeah.
said he looked like a puppy dog. You know, and then they're saying that he fawned over Putin. The clips that I saw, that was not the case. And also, when did it become taboo to talk to people that don't agree with you? You know, that's what Ronald Reagan did, and he ended the Cold War. Right. Richard Nixon did it with China. Trump actually did that with the Taliban, as well as other hostile governments in the Middle East. You know, and that is actually negotiation, right? Yeah. You know, negotiation is not dropping bombs on people. Negotiation is talking to people and figuring out a way forward. And sometimes that means you talk with people that don't like you and you don't like them. So to me, you know, I'm just, again, I'm kind of baffled because the mainstream media is like, oh, that's the worst thing ever. And I'm like, it just gives you a perspective from someone else. And again, you know, you get to make the judgment about what you think. And I suspect that the real issue is the fact that they just don't want the American people. Just like if you live in China, you don't get news from certain parts of the world. If you lived back in the USSR, you didn't get news from certain parts of the world. And I think it has a lot more to do with this is the way that we want to portray Vladimir Putin, and we don't want you to see the raw footage than it is that Tucker Carlson actually did that interview. And we that he's going to allow people to draw their own conclusions as opposed to a canned narrative that comes out from the mainstream media.
Yeah, if you can't see the other side's perspective, I mean, even strategic empathy is required to have any kind of common sense about what to do in the foreign affairs. I mean, hypersonic missiles are not a joke, okay? If we spend less time teaching people woke approaches to, you know, pronouns and actually taught maybe real science again, maybe we would have hypersonic missiles on level with theirs, but we don't. So,
well, also, you know, diplomacy is not sticking your fingers in your ear and just saying, nah, 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 nah. Yeah. Diplomacy is actually talking with the people across the table. And you may disagree on everything. You may hate each other's guts, but that's what diplomacy is. And somehow these people that are, you know, these geniuses of the State Department, somehow they've forgotten that.
Yeah, we've invested in our universities in hypersensitivity. They invested in hypersonics, and now they've eclipsed us in that area.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
we've eclipsed them in hypersensitivity, it appears, too. So
yes, that's very true. It's very sad.
I want to ask you about your background. You know, you kind of have a philosophical non-aggression approach based on the libertarian philosophy. Do not aggress against others. How did you square that with your career as a wrestler, where there's a lot of aggression going on in there?
Well, first of all, that's entertainment. I think sometimes it's funny because people that criticize professional wrestling, oh, it's all fake, and then they turn around and somehow it's real when they want it to be real. But nevertheless, you know, that's entertainment. And then also, you know, there are certain things within the wrestling industry that I guess, you know, certain rules and all those sort of things that it has its own set. You know, but for me, actually, most of the time, Kane was like the anti-libertarian, right? He was the person that relied on physical violence and relied on bullying people, and that's what he relied on. So it was really, I guess that's the other thing. You know, it's when you were the villain like that. You know, people criticize me. Oh, you did this or you did that. Well, I was the bad guy. I wanted people to dislike me. That's why we did it. All right. Now, of course,
so Kane was a bit of a statist, huh?
Oh, absolutely. He would have been. He would have been the dictator. You know, he would have been perfectly comfortable in that role. So, yes, that's a great way to put it. Yes, Kane was a statist.
Very good. You know, speaking of wrestling, your fellow WWE Hall of Famer Sting is retiring soon. Do you have any thoughts on that and working with him?
I didn't get to work with him that much. I was actually one match with him in WCW. I had one match in WCW, and that was with Sting. And that was very early in my career. And then he came to WWE late in his career. He'd already retired and come back, and then I was also late in my career. But Steve's a really great guy. He just, he just is. He's I can't, from my interactions with him, I can't say enough about the human being. He's always treated me very well. And he was also one of my favorites back when I was younger. So it's pretty cool when you get to work with the people that you watched on TV and go, wow, this is really awesome. I'm in the ring with Sting. How cool is that?
Yeah. I think I saw his age is 64 years old and he's still fighting. So that's pretty impressive.
Yeah. And I mean, he was, when he was in his prime, he was a great athlete. I mean, he could move. People forget he's not a small guy. He's probably 6'3" and 260 pounds, but he could do all the things you think of a much smaller person doing. So he's an impressive athlete. And I mean, frankly, one of the biggest superstars of all time, especially in WCW.
I know you're focused on your work as a mayor right now, but do you ever rule out returning to wrestling down the road when you're
I probably not getting in the ring. I watch it now and I'm amazed at how athletic everybody is. I don't think my body could take that kind of punishment anymore. But we always say never. So I leave the door open to many different things.
Yeah, very good. Well, I think what you've done at applying a balance between, pragmatic reality, conservative populism, libertarian principles has done well in your county. So I think a lot of people are excited to see what happens next and what happens with the results of your efforts there and the good people there. So ultimately, it's about letting people be unleashed, right? You don't take credit for any of the jobs that guys are building over there. It's really just letting them be unleashed and building wealth for people, right? Yeah.
That's exactly right. People here in East Tennessee are just wonderful folks. That's part of the reason I love this area so much. I'm not doing anything special. Conservative policies work, and that's what we do. And the proof is in the pudding.
Well, I look forward to seeing more from what you're doing there, and we'll continue to follow you. People should follow you, Glenn Jacobs, on Twitter or X now to see what your latest thoughts are and activities. And it's been a pleasure speaking with you, sir. Thank you.
Thanks, David. I appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thank you. And for those of you who want to stay in touch with us at A Neighbor's Choice, remember, email us hello@aneighborschoice.com.